Hello, my name is Beth Caruso. I'm a local author from Windsor, and I got started with writing books because I came across Alice Young. Now, who is Alice Young? You probably want to know. Well, she was the very first person to hang for witchcraft in all of colonial America. She was hanged on May the 26th, 1647. We don't have any specific records of why she was hanged, but we do know that during that year, across New England and specifically in Windsor, Connecticut, there was an influenza or similar epidemic that took hold of the community and wreaked havoc on the community. In 1646, there were only 6 people that died in Windsor, Connecticut. 1 year later, you have 27 people that die in a fairly small town. Now that's 4 times the rate, a little more even. And who were those people? Well, as with most flu epidemics, it targeted the children and it targeted the elderly. Well, the children that died that year, a couple were the children of Reverend John Warham, a very important person in the town, maybe the most important person. Also, a child of Bray Rossiter died. There were other important people too that lost loved ones. Legislators for the town of Windsor. John Porter lost his wife, who was older at the time. But I think the most significant impact that had an influence on Alice Young's accusation was the fact that 4 children died in a cluster right next to the home of Alice Young. All the while, her own daughter survived. No, we don't know for certain, but I do think she was from a minority group in town. The majority group, they were from the West Country or from the southwest of England. And on Backer Row, where she lived, she sat in the middle of sisters who were related. They were called the Tinker sisters, but they had different married names. So historians have not really keyed in on them that much. And part of that is probably because they were women and they tend to focus on the men. But all these sisters surrounding Alice Young were related. Their brother was in town, their mother was in town, and they were not from the West Country. They were actually from Windsor, England, not Windsor, Connecticut. Their brother was one of the biggest landowners in town. Was Alice Young related to them? We don't know for sure. Maybe she was related since she was right in the middle of this family grouping. Maybe her husband was related. Or perhaps they were just good friends from the old country. We have no way of knowing. But what I will tell you is that after Alice Young was hanged, this family left town. All of them. 1647 there are records, 1648 records. There was only one woman from that family who was a widow who ended up marrying her neighbor who stayed. Unfortunately, there's a lot of blurring of the lines between modern day Wicca and what these people were accused of. Basically, what they were accused of was black magic, which was signing a pact with the devil, and they all believed in the devil. The devil was a powerful force in opposition to Christ, and the devil belonged to the wilderness. And they were taming and settling the wilderness to take it away from the devil and to claim it for Christ. So when there was something that went horribly wrong in their communities, if there were a series of unfortunate events and someone nearby who could be scapegoated, they could be associated with witchcraft. And let me be clear, witchcraft then meant you were aligned with the devil, with dark forces to cause harm to your community. Wicca is a fairly new religion. It's based on some traditional magic, but it's also became a formalized religion. I believe it was the 1950s with Aleister Crowley, and a lot of that tradition actually stemmed from alchemy. So what Wiccans practice today and what people were accused of back in the 1600s, totally different things. And unfortunately, those lines get blurred. A lot of the witchcraft accusations, of course, they were a result of misogyny, but there were men who were accused as well. In Connecticut, there were 2 men that hanged. However, most of these men were associated with women who were accused witches. In Connecticut, it was John and Joan Carrington. We know John had sold a musket to a Native American, which was a big no-no, and just committing a previous crime, selling a gun to a native, or stealing something, that would often put a person in a precarious standing in the community, where they would be a person targeted for witchcraft when something really big went wrong. So other than that, we don't know why John and Joan were accused of witchcraft, but they hang together. There was one more couple, Rebecca Grainsmith and Nathaniel Grainsmith. Rebecca, from the record, it sounds a lot like she was mentally ill, because she said things like, yes, she was cavorting with the devil, and she had been with men and devils, and when it was time to name other witches, she named her husband, and he begged with her and he pleaded and he said, no, I'm not, let me take care of the children. But she wasn't going to go down alone, and who knows what her reasons were for that. Well, I think there should be more focus on this history all year round. I think there should be an exhibit somewhere where they really do go into our witch trial history, and where there's a place where more research can be done about this. Unfortunately, we don't have the plethora of records that they have in Salem, so that's more difficult to do. In Salem, we have a precise hanging place, Proctor's Ledge, and recently they've identified exactly where that is and put him a memorial. In Connecticut, we are not sure where the hanging site is. Minister DeLoss Love, he wrote in his book about Hartford that the hanging site was down Albany Avenue, somewhere near, a distance from town on a hill. But unfortunately, we don't have any primary source or original records to verify that. So there have been all kinds of theories of where it could be, including Meeting House Square, where there were stocks and a pillory, and the green, and there was also a jail on the corner of that green, but we don't know for sure. Other people say Trinity College, the hill there, but historians I've spoken to think that's not the case. There are records for Revolutionary War hangings, but who knows? Maybe earlier they did use that spot. It's a big mystery, so there's no specific place where people can go, which makes it a lot more difficult. Also, just as far as Hartford as an urban center now, a lot of the old places from that time are completely gone, except for ancient burying ground. But I do feel that this history should be researched more and talked about more in Connecticut, because there were forces going on here that made this first spark that led to Salem years down the line. It was the first example they had, and usually when there's a first for anything, people look back and they think about the first case and they see what happened. Unfortunately, again, we don't have the record, so it's so hard to know. But it would be great if more people could piece together more and more of these histories. I think in the case of Alice Young, there may be some truth to that, because I think she was in a minority group. And in that case, I think it did have to do with politics too, with who her family was and who they were connected to. The Tinker brother, he was connected to John Winthrop Jr. He was his assistant. This was back in 1647. When we think of Winthrop Jr., we think of him as being a popular governor, a renowned physician. At that point in time, he wasn't respected. He was viewed as an interloper from Massachusetts who was trying to get Pequot territories from the clutches of Connecticut and claiming them for Massachusetts. So the Pequot War had just happened, and this land issue was not settled yet. So Connecticut people were very wary of Winthrop when he first arrived in Connecticut and when he first started the Pequot Plantation, which later became New London. It's interesting because that same year, 1647, there were alchemists that Winthrop Jr. had he had encouraged to bring them over, and they were being jailed in Boston. So all these things were happening at the same time. So were there politics involved in this? You know, often there is, and I think there is just some circumstantial evidence to say that that might be a strong possibility in this case. Other cases, it could be about land ownership, it could be about Mary Johnson in Wethersfield with her. It was about committing a previous crime of stealing from her master. She was a servant, and she talked about murdering a child. But you have to keep in mind that Reverend Stone, who was a minister in Hartford at the time, had talked to her for hours and hours and hours, questioning her and badgering her. And we know today how there can be false confessions under duress with that kind of thing. So she admitted to being with men and devils, and she found herself, that's a train, it wasn't back then. But anyway, Mary Johnson admitted to the devil doing her work for her as a servant. She actually had a baby in jail, and that baby was raised by the jail keeper's son. Other situations, like Lydia Gilbert here in Windsor, she was accused of bewitching a gun that killed someone 3 years prior. So in other words, this gun was being used by the militia on the Grain, specifically by Thomas Allen, a young kid, 19 years old, mishandled his gun. The gun misfired. It killed Henry Stiles. Matthew Allen was his father. He was, very wealthy, very powerful within the community. And here his son had to go to court, and the family had to pay a fine, and his son couldn't carry a gun for a full year. So I guess they thought they wanted their reputation cleared. Rumors start happening, and 3 years later, people are talking, and Lydia Gilbert gets accused of bewitching the gun. It seems that Henry Stiles, the gentleman who was killed, was actually a boarder of Lydia and her husband. So perhaps he didn't pay up all his debts. We don't know what the story is. Maybe somebody heard them fighting. We just don't know exactly. But we do know that the Allens got all their fines back. Their name was cleared, and then young Thomas Allen went on to marry the minister's daughter, while Lydia Gilbert was indicted for witchcraft. So these are the kind of strange stories